Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But we'll begin by returning the focus to the border of, well, at the bottom of Texas, over in America, and the continuing incarceration of children whose parents are awaiting trial for illegal immigration. So it struck me yesterday after the programme. I do understand the deliberate attempts to disrupt this story and misrepresent it. I don't quite and never will understand the deep desire some people have to be misled. But there's so much going on here that I don't think we can look away. The angle I want to approach it from this morning is that of our Prime Minister, Theresa May, who will be pressing the flesh with Donald Trump shortly, and who, I guess, also bears responsibility for the fact that he'll be meeting the Queen while 3-year-old babies remain, as things stand, locked up, having been separated from their parents. So let's find stuff that I'm afraid, however passionately you subscribe to some of these ludicrous fake news sites, let's describe stuff that is just fact, okay? The parents of these children have crossed the border and stand accused of having done so illegally. If they're genuinely seeking asylum, if their case for asylum is genuine, then I suspect that is the circumstance in which the legality of their passage into the country becomes established. They're mostly fleeing appalling violence. You often hear people on the right citing Venezuela as a shining example of why socialism doesn't work, but when you point out that the disaster that is Venezuela is the reason why so many people are fleeing, the poverty in Guatemala, the violence throughout many parts of that region, suddenly they put wax in their ears and pretend they can't hear you. So people are fleeing violence and or poverty. I don't know enough about international law or the American legal system to tell you whether or not fleeing poverty is a sufficient grounds for asylum, but that's why the parents are locked up. Until May or April, I'll double-check the date with you shortly, the practice was to keep the families together. So perfectly capable to keep them locked up together. Parents go on trial, they're found to have entered the country illegally, you send them back whence they came, or you just drop them back on the other side of the border, and that is what has gone on. Barack Obama did it for years. I guess fully paid up members of the liberal elite would have a problem with what Barack Obama did as well, but it is possibly a little naive to suggest that borders serve no purpose and should be got rid of entirely. I've never actually heard anyone suggest that, but, you know, we should recognise the existence of the theory. So that is what historically happens, okay? And then the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, under instruction from the President, Donald Trump, decided to enact a zero-tolerance policy, allowable under legislation that was written on published on January the 25th, 2017. So astonishingly, or not, I guess, one of the first things that came out of the Trump White House. And this allowed the separation and incarceration of children. And that was triggered in, I think, about the beginning of May of this year. And that is why it is now happening, as a policy very deliberately and definitively introduced and implemented by Donald Trump's administration for one reason and one reason only. It is a ransom demand from Congress and the Senate, despite the fact that the Republican Party controls both of those houses. They are as yet unable to agree on a immigration policy, and they probably need new immigration policies. Things appear to be a mess. You see how easy it is to have a conversation about stuff that's just true without getting yourself bogged down in nonsense about George Soros and New World Orders. Might not be as fun, I guess, but we do all right on the old clicks, don't we, you and me? So we're now confining ourselves to things that are just true. The Republican-controlled Senate and Congress are unable to deliver an immigration bill upon which enough people can agree to ensure that it would pass through the House. Once it's passed through the House, it gets taken to the White House, at which point Donald Trump signs it. He won't sign anything that does not include an agreement to pay for the wall that Donald Trump campaigned furiously in the presidential run-up, that he would build and Mexico would pay for. So just when you think things can't get much madder, you realise that babies are being separated from their parents and locked up because Donald Trump insists that the American people pay for the wall that he swore blind the Mexicans would pay for when he was campaigning to become president. I still think that we are 100% on fact now. I don't think we've strayed into opinion. If you disagree, you know the number, 0345 6060 973. And historically, you'd have to conclude that until he gets the money from the American taxpayers to build the wall that he told them the Mexicans would pay for, these children will continue to suffer in ways that almost defy description. Now, I guess you could point to China of not too long ago, North Korea of today. You could point to plenty of other countries on the planet where human rights abuses are endemic and widespread. But I think that counts as whataboutery, because America is our ally. Historically, arguably our closest ally. And I think that we need, indeed I would suggest that we have a moral duty to hold our friends to a higher account than our enemies. Otherwise, you're left not knowing who are your friends and who are your enemies. Donald Trump now routinely condemning Germany while praising North Korea. I'm just going to leave that one to float for a while in your mind. Praising a man who starves his own people, locks them up in Stalinist-type gulags, condemning Angela Merkel's government in Germany. That is where we are now. I have, in the past, expressed some sympathy for Theresa May's political predicaments. I don't do that anymore. She is entirely the architect of her own disastrous regime. But she now has to make a call on this. And it is clear that principle probably won't come into it. And let me tell you why I just used the word sympathy very briefly. Thank you for listening to me today, by the way. This is a form of therapy for me. I'm not quite at Rachel Maddow's stage. The legendary American newscaster broke down in tears while describing what was happening in these prisons yesterday. But I do, like most people listening to this program, really struggle to understand how this can be happening in the civilized Western world of Christian values, ostensibly. So let me very oddly use this programme as a lens through which to examine Theresa May's predicament. I would like, and if I were to use a word like responsibility or duty as a journalist, which I won't because it makes me sound even more pompous than usual, I would like to talk about nothing else until these children are reunited with their parents. I hesitate to tell you this because you're suffering enough already, but a former head of ICE, the Immigration Authority in America, told the Washington Post last night that a lot of them will never be reunited with their parents because the way that the separation has occurred is going to make it impossible for these families to be put back together. So even if you're still clinging to the notion that, oh, well, they shouldn't have come then, it's their own fault, that nobody could possibly have contemplated the possibility of being separated from their child forever. I think if it was me, I'd stay in my war zone and starve to death with my baby rather than be separated from them forever. Or no, I wouldn't, would I? I'd do it. I'd still go in the hope that whatever happened to me, my child would actually live. But that's where we are now, okay? So by all means, click on your InfoWars articles and start cheering and putting your thumbs up about the thought of all these children never seeing their mums again. That's great. Good luck to you. I'll light a candle for you in church on Sunday. But the reason why I have some, what's the word then? I don't know, not sympathy. But if I did that on this programme, if I did it until this is stopped, if I talked about nothing else, I just sort of shone the light onto this one issue that suggests to me that the Western establishment is marching into a very, very dark and ugly place, is marching into proper, full-on fascism. You're seeing it in Italy, you're seeing it in America. I would probably not last until Christmas in the job because you wouldn't be able to listen to it every day, would you? I mean, I wouldn't. I don't think. And that is my, if you like, moral failure. I don't, why this is a commercial radio station, whether it was the BBC or not, there's no way I'd be allowed to sit here for 3 hours every day and talk about nothing else, even though I think morally that would probably be our duty at the moment. And Theresa May's problem is that she has to put the interests of the United Kingdom first, Jeremy Corbyn is perceived as a politician who wouldn't do that. He's perceived as a politician who would pursue the moral line to the detriment, perhaps, of the national interest or the economic interest of this country. He would, it is believed by his supporters, he would do what he believed to be morally right rather than what he believed to be in the national interest. It is not a million miles away from what Robin Cook described as an ethical foreign policy. But how many times have we sat here together and recognised the absurdity of an ethical foreign policy? Because it would involve cutting your own nose off somehow to spite your own face while giving the benefits to people on the other side of the world. And you're never going to get re-elected if you do that. I don't think. I'd like to be wrong, but I don't think I am. And that leads us to the question of what Theresa May should do about the fact that Donald Trump is tearing children from their mother's teat and locking them up in circumstances that are not only going to traumatise them for the rest of their lives, but will also, in many cases, ensure that they never see their mother again. And our Prime Minister is about to shake his hand. And she's shaken some very dirty hands. All British Prime Ministers have, whether you're talking about the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia or whether you're talking about other leaders who have appalling records. But again, I say to you, we surely hold our friends to higher account than our enemies or the people with whom we don't agree. She's got to shake that hand next month. Next time she is asked, and she will be, what her attitude is to this policy, what do you think she should say? 0345 6060 973. That's all. I know what I would say, but that possibly would be the reason why I'd never be Prime Minister. I would say this is utterly despicable. This is worthy of comparison with the Third Reich in Germany. This is one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen a democratically elected government undertake. This is gross. This is foul. This is vile. And I would rather... I'd rather go 10 rounds with Mike Tyson than ever share breath with this despicable individual, Donald Trump. But I'm not a diplomat. What should she do? What can she do? What will she do? What would you do? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. You will get through on this one, because I'm not inviting you to pick a side and start lobbing rotten tomatoes at each other. If you're comfortable with what I've described, I'm not sure that there's room in this particular conversation. There was plenty of room for you yesterday, but I'm not sure in this particular conversation there's room for you. If we work from the principle that this is beyond despicable, what is happening, deliberately and consciously, if we work from that starting point, what on earth should Theresa May do? And I'm afraid this is the point at which we mention Brexit, because they're still clinging to the notion that this man-child is somehow going to favour Britain over America or over other countries in looming trade negotiations that are desperately needed by us to plug a tiny proportion of the enormous gap that's going to be left in our economy after we leave the single market. So what should she do? And I am also going to ask you whether or not you feel sorry for her. I think she's an appalling Prime Minister. I think Britain is currently bereft of leadership. This is the most rudderless our nation has ever been, as events in the House of Commons later today will prove. I think we're probably going to see Labour rebels propping up Theresa May's government in the Brexit vote. But as a human, I feel sorry for her. I wouldn't want to have to make this call. It's easy to sit here. It's easy to tweet and text and do whatever. But what? What should she do? What can she do? And yes, I will ask you whether or not you feel sorry for her, because I know this upsets a lot of people, but I do feel sorry for her. Here are the numbers now. You will get through. The child catcher-in-chief, currently President of the United States of America, is due in Britain next month. Theresa May's spokesman yesterday declined an opportunity to condemn the incarceration of babies and the potential permanent separation of those babies from their parents. What should the Prime Minister do? What should she say? What should she do? How should she act? How do you want her to behave? Patrick is in Fyn in Denmark. Patrick, what would you do? Is she your Prime Minister, or are you providing us with the Danish perspective?
No, I still consider her as my Prime Minister, even though I have another one here.
OK. What do you think she should do?
I think she should go to the United Nations and suggest that until this is stopped, sanctions should be imposed.
What sort of sanctions?
Trade sanctions, perhaps?
don't know that we've got. I don't know that we've. I mean, how do we hurt him? He's already embarking on a trade war with the second biggest economy, or the biggest economy in the world, China, and of course they've pulled out the United Nations Security Council, which, for the record, is a far from perfect institution. They probably wouldn't do her bidding, would they?
No, they wouldn't. So, he's turning into what looks like a bad guy from a Batman film.
Well, yes, it is getting pantomime-ish in its villainy until you hear. That's why I played The Cries of the Children yesterday, just to lift it off the newspapers and take it out of social media and hopefully just resonate in a wholly human way with people.
And on the subject of your other question, do I feel sorry for her?
Yeah.
I feel a certain amount of pity for her, but she had a couple of opportunities where she could have handed over the baton to somebody else. I mean, the various disagreements she's had with Boris, and when people learnt more about the hostile environment, that probably could have been an opportunity to say, actually, now's the time to go.
Yes, well, the problem is who would replace her? And Boris Johnson recently started sort of sucking up to Donald Trump, despite occasionally, when he tells the truth, it somehow creeps out of his mouth unguarded. He described him in very unflattering terms before he was elected president, but like most very right-wing people, he kind of gets a bit aroused by power, and now he's genuflecting to Donald Trump, suggesting he should do the Brexit negotiations. When I say, do you feel sorry for her, it's not really an emotional descriptor. It's more the idea of having sympathy for the position that she's in, because it's a rock and a hard place. You've come up with sanctions. It's something you might reach for early, but your Foreign Office, your diplomatic corps would tell you pretty quickly why that wouldn't work. That's not going to have any effect on him whatsoever. He's a massive lying bully, and he's a really, really powerful lying bully. His relationship with the truth is non-existent, and even if in an imaginable universe you brought in sanctions that crippled the American economy, which we can't do, he would tell his base that it was all Hillary Clinton's fault or George Soros's fault, and it wouldn't actually work. You would never hurt him, do you see, or his... No. Or his regime. It's a very curious position. Thank you, mate. That's a nice start, and that's the point. You've helped me clarify the question a bit. I'm not asking you to have sympathy for Theresa May in the sense of, oh, poor Theresa. She brought all of this on herself, but sympathy for the position that she's in. I.e., I wouldn't want to be in it. What would you do? What can she do? You've essentially got our closest ally running concentration camps for children. That's what we've got now. However you dress it up, that is what is happening. And yesterday, her spokesman declined an opportunity to condemn it. What should he have done? Former political editor of the Daily Mail, I think. Almost needless to say. What should he have done? And I don't think it's... No, it's not. It's holding you in the highest of respect when I ask you what you would do. Darryl is in Birmingham. Darryl, what do you think?
I have no sympathy for her because, to be honest, I think if she was given the chance, she'd do the same thing.
That's pretty strong, isn't it?
Well, let's just look at some salient facts for a second. We've got a Prime Minister who is married to a board member, a senior board member of G4S. G4S.
Is he? I don't know that that's true. You have to understand. Okay, well, but you don't even need to bring her husband into it. You can just say that as Home Secretary, she gave a lot of contracts to G4S, and G4S has presided over some pretty grim practices at places like Yarlswood and elsewhere. That's where we're going with this, right?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Correct.
Well, let's just leave the husband out of it, because I haven't got. I'm pretty good, but I'm not that good. I haven't got everything at my fingertips.
So, in terms of that, I believe that she has the same opinion as many in the American government, that these children aren't people particularly. They're a commodity to be traded.
And pain me though it does to say this, because I do like to give people the benefit of the doubt. The hostile environment story, for which Amelia Gentleman, the Guardian journalist, I'm delighted to tell you, last night won the Paul Foot Award from Private Eye. The fact that she presided over the hostile environment and must have known what was happening does add some weight to your suggestion that she is capable of seeing a hierarchy of humanity, and if elderly British West Indian people can be second-class citizens, then, Guatemalan babies easily can.
Exactly, and this isn't just... At the moment, we're all concentrating on Donald Trump and saying this is Donald Trump's idea. It's not. It's the people around him as well. When you start to look at his cabinet and their connections into the detention centres, you've got...
Which are for profit. This is a thing that
They are
Brits often can't even begin to believe, that these facilities are run for profit.
Precisely. You've got Betsy DeVos, who is on the board of 3.
Yeah, stop doing that, because I haven't got the facts in front of me. And I know you've done your research, but unless you run it by the producer before you come on, I can't run the risk of you saying something factually incorrect. So, in answer to the question of what should Theresa May do, then you would say what?
She can't do anything at the moment. What she should do is condemn him roundly. What she should do is say that Britain does not stand with a country that holds children in cages. That is what she should do. However, she will not do that. And the reason for her not doing that is right now, she's a pariah. She's got no friends in Europe. She's got very few friends across the rest of the globe, as we've seen in terms of the so-called Brexit negotiations that will go on afterwards with India and Japan and everywhere, where they've turned around and gone, well, actually, we want more. There is no country that will stand with the UK, with Theresa May, in terms of giving her support. So the only person that supports her at the moment is Donald Trump.
He doesn't really support her, does he? It's more in hope than expectation that we're hanging in there.
It's the business equivalent of crocodile tears. It's the business equivalent of the checks in the post. It really is. She has nowhere else to go. She's clinging to him. Like she clung to him when he was almost falling down those stairs. She's clinging to him for dear life because she has no other option. She will not condemn him. She'll probably give some crocodile tears at PMQs, probably say something along the lines of the British government does not support this policy, when in fact, when you look at Yaleswood, we were doing exactly the same thing.
Not exactly the same thing, Daryl.
Very close.
Well, no. There's no prospect of anybody at Yaleswood, despicable that some of the behaviours there have been. Amelia Gentleman's looking into that as well, actually. If I was running Yaleswood, I'd be quaking in my boots at the thought of that doughty journalist getting stuck in. But the permanent separation of families, the idea that these children will never see their parents again, that doesn't apply to Yaleswood. And locking up babies...
I will accept that.
Locking up babies, 3-4-year-old toddlers without their parents, that doesn't really happen either.
I'll accept that point because you're quite right there. But it doesn't take a genius to think at what point would that happen. And evil follows evil, and it only takes one person to think, you know what? If the US could do it, then so can we. We used to look at the gulags in Russia and the way the Chinese were dealing with people, and now we don't even think about how China deals with these people because they just turn around and go, if you don't like it, we won't deal with you.
And you're right to point out that the American president, of course, has been pouring praise on North Korea. That is probably the closest country I'm aware of on the planet that still has these sort of practices in place. And I don't fight shy, I'm afraid, of the concentration camp description. Donald Trump has opened concentration camps for children. The British Prime Minister has to shake his hand next month. What should she say about the concentration camps? It's 10:30. Where we are wondering what Theresa May should do about Donald Trump's concentration camps for children. Couple of clarifications. I think possibly today might be one of those days where I read out a couple of texts from people who'll never have the guts to ring in. Remind me which war Mexicans are fleeing, James, as you said earlier. Fake news at it again, says Simon. I'm pretty sure I didn't say there was a war in Mexico. I'm pretty sure I said that a lot of these people are fleeing abject poverty, war and violence, not necessarily all three at the same time. But if you want the casualty count, Simon, and I know you don't, because the last thing you want is facts, 29,000 homicides recorded in Mexico in 2017. 29,000 people murdered, as the drug cartels don't care who gets caught up in the crossfire between them, their rivals and the authorities. So people are fleeing what I would describe as a war zone, but it's obviously a war between gangsters, criminals and often corrupt police officers rather than sovereign nations. And David, mate, we're going to ring you now so you can come on and expand on this. O'Brien, you can play the cries of babies all you like. You can abuse Trump all you like. Waste of your halitosis breath. I hear your voice breaking. Careful you don't join the babies in blubbing. You might be taken off air. Wishful thinking on my part. God bless Trump. Mate, we're ringing you now. So I'm tempted to wait. Just let the big man on the radio. Let him actually back up. Because these keyboard warriors, as you know, fascinate me. So can we any prospect of him coming on? Can we? We'll crack on with the programme in the meantime, big man, all right? But you know the next time your phone rings, it's me. Ian's in Leeds. Ian, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah. I'm just thinking back to 1983 when Reagan sent forces to invade Grenada, which was and still is a member of the Commonwealth and still has a British monarch as its.
You're giving me a history. You're giving me a history lesson now. I have to confess.
Okay, yeah. Well, Margaret Thatcher did condemn the actions, but she didn't do it in public because I'm sure she realised that, to preserve the so-called Atlantic Alliance, maybe she couldn't say too much against Reagan's actions, even though Grenada was a member of the British Commonwealth as it was then. So I'm thinking maybe Theresa May found herself in this, in a similar bind, made ever worse by Brexit.
Why this is a bit off topic actually, but just for the benefits of my ignorance, why did Reagan invade Grenada?
Because he felt it was a communist outpost, and
so it was regime change.
Yeah, but effectively it was regime change. Yes, and he felt that he didn't want communism to spread in the Caribbean and Central America and South America, which Americans sort of regarded as their backyard.
Okay, and, so I mean, we're back in the Cold War days, and it would tie in with tie in with Cuba and the Bay of Pigs and all that, and that kind, and Nicaragua.
Exactly. I mean, this is a decade when Reagan called the Soviet Union the evil empire, and so on and so on. So it fits into all that. And
Thatcher must have been opposed to it because he was interfering in a Commonwealth country, but couldn't.
Absolutely.
Sanction or punish. So really what you're saying is that we never, whoever's in charge, whether it's Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan or the man-child, we can never land a meaningful punch on America in any way.
Not really, no. And Britain's position is made ever worse, as I said, with Brexit, because it actually has made Britain overall weaker.
Yeah, but I mean, under your analysis, I'm not sure I can let you have that, because it couldn't really be any worse, even without Brexit.
Well, I'm actually going by what Donald Trump's trade envoy said, for example, Wilbur Ross, who said,
yes.
Brexit is a perfect opportunity to steal business from Britain.
Yes, he did say that.
The Russians have actually said Brexit has made Britain weaker. So, in a way, I always say, don't take my word for it. Look what other people are saying.
You're a very well-informed man, Ian, and I'm very grateful for the input, but it's arguably an even bleaker analysis than where we were when you started speaking. We'll talk again soon, I hope. Bob's in the city. Bob, what would you like to say?
Good morning, Jay.
Hello, Bob.
I can understand Theresa May's reticence to openly criticise the Trump administration, but I wonder if there's any scope to send out any sort of joint communique with Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron. I mean, despite our process of trying to leave the...
So that adds an extra layer to Ian's description of Brexit, doesn't it, as having a role in the weakening of our sort of status on the national stage?
It weakens us. It weakens us economically.
So but what could Merkel, Macron and May... Oh, no, I've never noticed that before. The three M's, what could they do together that would be meaningful to go for the fourth M?
To be honest, I don't think they make any difference to Trump's policy whatsoever. But I think it's important for the key states in Europe that we still are just about clinging on to actually say this is immoral, this is against our values. We can it's just stamping that we disagree with it without doing this on our own, putting...
So we'd insulate ourselves slightly from repercussions by doing it in company. It's still a bit pathetic, though, isn't it, really?
It is.
Well, what if she just refused? What if she just cancelled the visit? What's the worst he could do to us?
Well, I don't think it'll change him very much at all. There'll be a few...
Because we're still labouring under this illusion that he's going to respond to logical treatment, aren't we?
Well, he's not. As you say, he's a man-child, and he reacts in a very childish manner. He's sticking to his build the wall policy, and
but he's not though. He's not even doing, because he said Mexico will pay for the wall. So he's even backtracked completely 100% on that.
I know, but
So don't feel bad. I'm not hectoring you, but there's nowhere else to go now. I think I might throw that one up in the air as well. The question of what's the worst that could happen if she just cancelled the visit. What are we hoping to get from America that is for the benefit of the nation, that's for the national interest, that would somehow be compromised by calling him out for putting children in concentration camps? I mean, this is not a phrase that should ever have been uttered by anyone, is it?
It's incredible. But, I go back to the old adage, you can let fascism win. Fascism wins by good people staying silent. And I think you have to say something.
Yeah, but
he
still wins. Sometimes
he will win.
Good, yes. Well, those are the two. Well, let's add the extra layer of that question then to the mix. What's the worst that could happen now? And you can answer this even if you find my position on Brexit obnoxious. There's no sort of entry requirements on this one. What would happen if she did just say, look, we understand you've got your own way of dealing with your own problems, but I cannot condone a regime that's opened concentration camps for children. 0345 6060 973. What's the worst that Trump could do? It's 10:43. James is in Barnes. James, what would you do?
Hi, James. I would wonder. I wonder what Mr. Churchill would do. I know what he would do.
Do you?
And, I think I know what he would do. He wouldn't have him touch the shores of Dover, let alone go and see the Queen. And I think that, as you've just rightly...
I sometimes mythologise Churchill. He did some pretty grim things in the He was pretty comfortable with concentration camps, mate. I mean, so he could say, I condemn you for putting children in concentration camps, and Donald Trump would say, well, what did you do in South Africa?
Well, yes, he could do that.
So that falls apart like a cheap suit. Sorry, I'm in that mood today. I'm going to pick a fight with everyone. It's not really fair, but Churchill... Let's leave Churchill out of it, all right? And what in the 21st century...
Bring up to say that. I actually run up, and my point was...
Go on.
I think that the only way that we can deal with Mr. Trump is how you would deal with a child. And Mr. Trump is going to get a massive PR, ego, amazing... it's his dream to come to England and meet the Queen.
Yeah.
And if we tell the world that we are rescinding his visit to meet our Queen and shake her hand...
Yes.
Because of his disgraceful, abominable behaviour in what is going on.
And what's the worst that he could do in return?
He can't do anything worse, because when your guy just run up now with an analogy about Thatcher and Reagan, in those days, whatever we thought about Thatcher or Reagan, there was a closeness, and they were our allies in the real sense of the word. This man is the only ally he is of the people that vote for him. That's all he cares about, and himself. And therefore, and there is going to be no trade deal with Mr. Trump, as we can see already. So therefore, we lose nothing at all. Apart from we gain, because we gain respect from the world and we do the right thing. And he can't get out of it. How embarrassing for him, because we are saying you're not going to shake the hands of our Queen whilst you are doing this. That's
going to earn my support, but because we don't know what impact it might have on intelligence sharing or on future economic relations, and I, like you, would say I don't care. We have to do what's right, but that's why we're not running the country, perhaps, James.
Well, I think Theresa May is acting according to it's part of the course with her. She has no humanity, no empathy with people suffering, and no humility. And we know, without going into it, with Grenfell, with the Windrush, she does not
universal credit.
She does not react to people's...
It's a liberating mindset for politicians. I don't know that it's unique to people on the right. People who profess as left-wing can also display callousness, but this ability to see human beings as somehow being in different divisions. They're being, it's the bedrock of fascism, isn't it? The way that you could, whether it's Roma or Jews or Muslims or whatever it is, the idea that you can somehow subscribe to the notion that you're superior to them in an innate and eternal way. What's so weird about it is how popular that mindset is with profoundly and obviously inadequate human beings. But maybe that's the answer. Maybe it is attractive. Maybe it's a lot easier to sell yourself the idea that you're superior to another human being when all of the available evidence says the precise opposite, where we are wondering what Theresa May should do in response to Donald Trump's opening of concentration camps for children. The definition of a concentration camp, if you're wondering whether perhaps I'm misusing the word, is a place where a government forces people to live without trial. And usually, of course, those people belong to groups that the government does not like. That's pretty much the consensus as distilled down on Wikipedia, which has an astonishingly detailed entry on the history and the modern employment of such facilities. So a place where a government forces people to live without trial. Those people are usually belonging to groups the government does not like. You've heard how Donald Trump talks about people from other countries. You've heard how he talks about foreigners, despite, of course, being the grandson of an immigrant, the ex-husband of an immigrant, and the current husband of an immigrant. And that's how you know it's fascism, isn't it? Because it's that supreme confidence that your followers won't care about the evidence that you're a massive liar. Oh, I really hate immigrants. You're married to one. Your ex-wife is one. Your granddad was one. Your grandma was one. Oh, I don't hate all immigrants. Oh, which ones do you hate then? Well, obviously, it's the sort of brown ones. Isn't it? And that's what a concentration camp is. That's what he's opened. And Theresa May will shake his hand next month and he will meet the Queen. I don't think we've been there before, have we? Saudi Arabia is a pretty despicable country, a pretty despicable regime where women are still effectively the property of their fathers and then their husbands. China, yeah, no, they've got pretty gross facilities in China. But as I've said to you a billion times, surely we have to hold our friends to a higher standard than our enemies. 10:52 is the time. Mark is in Tyne and Weir. Mark, what can she do? And I mean, would it make any difference anyway?
Well, maybe it wouldn't, but I do think she's got to put her foot down and just say this sort of thing, treating people like this isn't acceptable at all, and that surely it must go against any human rights laws to separate children for good from their parents. I mean, she should also tell him to watch his language.
That's why this is the real reason, presumably, that they've pulled out of the Human Rights Council, isn't it? Albeit that it's a deeply flawed institution, but it is the only one that holds countries to account in a supranational way. And lo and behold, the minute he opens a concentration camp for children, they pull out of the Security Council.
That's true, but they've pulled out and they've said it's because, and it's true to a point, that countries like China and that don't have good human rights. So
why should we?
I'm just totally confused by the behaviour of Trump on all levels. And I mean, yesterday he said that illegal immigrants infest the country. Well, all right, they might be doing wrong, but it reminded me of when the Rwandan genocide, when people called one another cockroaches.
Yes, of course. I mean, it's deliberate. It's as old as the hills. The playbook is there. But what can Theresa May do?
Well, I think she's got to get other countries on her side. And I mean, and if he wants Mexico to build this wall, he'll just be making the problem worse. How can Mexico, the poor country where there's so much poverty and crime, afford to build a wall? There'd be more people.
Yes, but you're doing facts, aren't you? You're asking rational questions in response to what are essentially emotional triggers. He's triggered his base. His base are triggered. They're terrified of things that don't exist. They honestly believe that London is full of no-go zones and that Germany has got rising crime rates. It's the lowest it's been since 1982, I think. They believe things that aren't true, so you can't fight that with the truth.
Well, but I think we've got to remember there's a lot of, I don't judge America by this. I've never been, but there's obviously lots of decent, caring people there who are horrified as well. And we've all got to stick together. The people that we're all people in the end. I feel a bit tearful about it.
That's all right. That's because you're human.
I'm sorry.
That's all right, mate. Don't worry.
I don't know what to do. I just think of all the wars. Sorry. Don't
worry.
If I'm honest, I've had a bit of a breakdown recently.
Oh, Mark, my friend, can I give you some advice? Would you mind?
Yeah.
Do you know what? Much as I value your listenership and calling in, I think you should probably steer clear of the news for a few weeks. I genuinely do. I have a friend who's been in a similar position to you, and his doctor advised him to do that.
The problem. Oh, sorry, I keep butting in my bad habit.
Carry on.
Well, I do think it. Can I just say something? I think it's really important that all the good people out there anywhere try and support things like fair trade and human rights.
Bless you. We feel like we're on the losing. We feel like we're on the losing side at the moment. But Mark, my friend, promise me you'll just step away from the news for a few weeks, all right, or a few days.
The trouble is, I have enough trouble with my own thoughts and the horrible things I had in my life.
I understand that, but I think you need to stop torturing yourself with reality and just take your eyes off it for a while. I really do. I have no obviously, I have no qualifications whatsoever to say this, but if it's because you don't feel alone either. A lot of people feel genuinely shocked at the horrors that are now unfolding on our own turf. That's what's so hard to process and contemplate. We kind of thought stuff like this happened during weird aberrations in 1930s Berlin, or as you mentioned, in sort of far off African civil wars. It didn't actually realise when we watched the footage at school about the Holocaust that the kid at the next desk could conceivably be perfectly cool about it if it ever started happening again. And I'm obviously not going to make a habit of this, but I would discourage you from listening to news-based programmes again. If you drop me an email, I can give you a heads up when we're doing lighter topics so that you can still sort of keep a foot in the outside world. I don't want you going into isolation. And if we're talking about something a little less horrible and horrifying, I would also say, my friend, that your ability to be horrified speaks of your humanity. There are plenty of people listening to this programme who are incapable of being horrified, even when we ring them up and invite them to come onto the programme. Lee is in Newport. Lee, what would you like to say?
I just like to take my hat off to Mark as well. I think I feel for him in his passion there as well. Just take my hat off to him there.
Of course, good man.
I think Theresa May has got a golden opportunity here to stand up to a racist and a complete and absolute narcissist. It's also going to put her in a good light with the rest of the world and might help her with the Brexit negotiation, standing shoulder to shoulder with Macron, Merkel, and so on as well, and help her with the biggest trading bloc in the world. Trump is playing to his base, basically. He's got an 87% approval rating within the Republican Party. Now, basically, these camps will only get bigger and bigger, and people come in and start profiting from it. I'm going to put it into a bit of reality.
Go on.
Right now, James, I am going up to my kids' school, right, to take their class bear, Louis the Bear, to take him up to the school to hand him back into the class there. That is my reality there.
Yes.
On the reality there, right, they can't take kids to bears into on the other side of across the pond into concentration camps. I think it's absolutely for what Trump is doing.
Yes.
And to be honest as well, I've been to Auschwitz. I've been there. I read the Anne Frank diary back to back many a times, and did a classroom representation when I was a child in there as well. And I tell you what, when I walked through that concentration camp, Auschwitz, and I seen flowers on top of pictures where families had been ripped apart, like exactly in the sense of what he's doing here, and they didn't know where their families went. They didn't have a clue where their families went. Oh, that's my friend. And they hung flowers on top of the pictures in Auschwitz. And this man has to be stopped. We lost millions upon millions of people in the Second World War. We lost great British men, superheroes, I teach my boys. That's what I call them, superheroes. And we lost great men.
So did America. Don't forget, Lee. So American blood spilt to resist precisely what's now in the White House.
Exactly. And so and I call them superheroes. And this despicable man who calls Kim Jong-un a good man should be absolutely thrown out somehow, some way out of the White House, and we should stand up, all of us, side to side, and fight people like this.
Well, I mean, you're preaching to the choir. It's not the choir that need to hear it, but I hope some of the people who do need to hear it register what you have said, Lee. Take care, my friend. And you mentioned Anne Frank, quite rightly. This is a tweet from the Anne Frank Centre in America that came out and way ahead of the game before these camps were even opened. This is from the 8th of August of last year. This is the Anne Frank Centre for Mutual Respect, a national organisation which works towards Anne's dream of no prejudice. They wrote, alarming parallels of history escalate. The president, and then they have some checkpoints. The president creates his own media. He exploits youth at a rally. He endorses police brutality. He demonises people who believe, look or love differently. He strips vulnerable people of their families, jobs and ability to live. He believes Congress should change its rules to give him more power. The Anne Frank Centre for Mutual Respect believes never again to any people, and now. It's 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Mark, if you are still listening after I advised you not to, there's so much love for you coming into the studio today that I hope by a sort of process of emotional osmosis, some of it can find its way to you. And we are now going to talk about something which I don't think will add to your burdens. An awful lot of people actually are contacting me to say they feel exactly the same as Mark. And that, I suppose, is positive, isn't it? I mean, we still recognise horror. We still recognise, most of us still recognise absolutely disgusting practices when we see them. Unfortunately, the man responsible for them is coming here next month, and I don't know what we're going to do. I certainly don't know what Theresa May is going to do, and I can say with some confidence that the one person who has absolutely no idea what Theresa May is going to do is usually Theresa May. We will begin, as we have, I think, every day, or almost every day this week, with the incarceration of children in American concentration camps, children who had been forcibly removed from their parents, and Donald Trump's admission yesterday that it was all his fault. Because, of course, you can't undo it unless it was you what did it. Just for people who still like facts, and I know that's a diminishing, or it feels some mornings like that's a diminishing constituency. It was an executive order that he issued on January the 20th, 2017. So pretty much one of the first things he did in the Oval Office was to issue the executive order that allowed this policy to be enacted. It wasn't, of course, enacted until the Attorney General Jeff Sessions dropped it on April the 6th, 2018. This kind of stuff, if you know which search terms to use, or you follow the right people on social media, the right journalists and public policy experts, it would take you about 3 to 4 minutes, I think, to find this out for yourself. Even with the dates. If you follow me on Twitter, you will see the memorandum that brings in that executive order from January 2017, the actual documentation with the White House letterhead at the top of it. I mention this because I'm having one of those days where I can't quite believe how many people in the crowd still insist that the Emperor is wearing luscious robes. It's there in actual black and white with White House letterheads at the top of the page, whatever the word is, I don't know. So those are the facts, okay? Here are some other facts, right? Barack Obama deported a lot of illegal immigrants, and every president before him did so as well. And in 2014, there was a surge in the number of unaccompanied children coming into America over that border, that Texas border, and they had nowhere to put them, and they were put in a facility that looks a little bit like the concentration camps that we've seen this week. But they were put there temporarily before attempting to reunite them with their family. They were not put there while their parents were awaiting trial. So there are no comparisons at all. It takes you about another 3 minutes to find that out if you're actually looking for the fact. So in 6 minutes flat, you could have completely, if you wanted to, could have completely destroyed any notion that what has been happening in America since April the 6th was in any way similar to what had happened in America prior to Donald Trump becoming president, was in any way similar and or identical to what went on under Barack Obama or sundry Bushes and Clintons. You could, if you wanted to find out, establish in less than the amount of time it takes for a kettle to boil that all of the people on the fake news sites and the social media platforms claiming that this isn't Trump, you could have worked out for yourself in less time than it takes a kettle to boil that they were lying to you. And what I'm interested in today is the psychology of people that like being lied to. The psychology of people that deliberately and consciously choose not to try to find out the facts, who really buy into that Kellyanne Conway line about alternative facts. Because I still, after all these, well, after these 2 years of wrestling with these sort of questions, I just don't get it. It's so easy to find out the truth. Why do people love believing the opposite of the truth? And of course, what happened with the rescinding of the executive order yesterday is that Donald Trump made a mug of his own supporters. I think there was a time when I would have said they're too thick to notice, but it's not thickness, is it? It's not a lack of intelligence. They don't mind. You cannot describe what he did yesterday as anything other than a U-turn. He has lifted the policy using an executive order that was brought in by his own Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, on April the 6th. So all of the nonsense about hating it, that was it. It's the Democrats' fault. It was the Democrats what did it. And all of the people who amplify that lie, all of the people who repeat it, yesterday were made to look like complete muffins by Donald Trump himself. Because they'd all said it was nothing to do with him, and then he essentially confirmed that it was everything to do with him. I can't help it. It's the Democrats' fault. Oh, all right, I can help it, and I'll stop the whole thing immediately. So in that nanosecond, during that characteristically bizarre speech, he made mugs of every single person who has spent the last few days trying to claim that it was the Democrats what did it, or that Barack Obama did the same, or that it had nothing to do with Donald Trump, or that the law was brought in before him. The executive order was issued on January the 20th, 2017, and the policy was introduced specifically by Jeff Sessions on April the 6th, 2018. I'm going to say it again because it's got quite a nice ring to it. You could have found this out for yourself in less time than it takes a kettle to boil, okay? To come to the boil, to be pedantic and precise, which are, of course, great watchwords on this programme. It's a home of pedantry and precision. You could have found this out for yourself in less time than it takes a kettle to come to the boil. So I guess if you're sort of chomping at the bit and feeling really stupid and angry, or still trying to claim that these facts aren't facts and that you prefer the alternative facts, it's unlikely that you'll ring. But I would love you to tell me, probably from the perspective of someone who hasn't swallowed the Kool-Aid, someone who doesn't enjoy being lied to. That's the thing. It's the only phrase I've got. I would like you to tell me what's going on. How do you account for this? Why, when you can find out the truth in 2 minutes flat on an issue as urgent and as huge as tearing children away from their parents and locking them up in cages, something as massive as that, something that has echoes of Holocaust, albeit thankfully nobody's died yet. There are some appalling reports coming out of one of these detention centres involving abuses, and a lot of people now beginning to worry about where some of these children might end up. The former head of the Immigration Authority in America warning that some of these families will never be reunited. The scale of the problem is so huge that the reuniting of families will probably prove impossible in many cases. So you look at that as a human being, and it's not that long ago, probably only 3 years ago, that we would have thought every human being would feel the same about something like this. Everybody's going to feel the same about tearing children away from their mums and locking them up in cages. You mean regardless of how you feel about immigration or borders or control or whatever it may be, left wing, right wing, stick it in the middle wing, whatever you are, we would have, 2-3 years ago, we'd have thought there was a tiny constituency of people who probably had swastika tattoos or something like that, a tiny constituency of people who would be comfortable or even enthusiastic about the idea of doing this to children, utterly innocent children, okay? Now we know that's not true, and this is why, a poor fellow who rang in yesterday in a very high emotional state, this is why a lot of people are feeling really scared and discomforted at the moment, because you don't even know now whether or not that fella sitting opposite you at work is cool with children being treated like this. You don't even know now whether your next-door neighbour or your old school friend, you've probably been on Facebook in the last couple of days and seen somebody that you thought you knew well, somebody you liked, possibly even loved, is comfortable with doing this to children. And one of the ways that they have managed to justify their comfort with this being done to children is to punt this narrative about it somehow not being Trump's fault. Now, this is a pretty scant silver lining for one of the darkest of clouds, but that presumably is because somewhere deep inside they still feel that it's indefensible. So rather than having to defend it, you instead say, oh yeah, but the other fella did it too. And then we're back to the ludicrous drawing of lines, the footballification of everything. Pick your side, ignore everything else, just scream abuse at the other lot. It's where lock her up comes up, you know, that kind of thing. I don't really care about understanding or thinking, but just show me who I'm supposed to scream at today. Lock her up. How many members of his administration are actually now in jail? His former campaign manager is now in jail. The man who came up, I think Paul Manafort came up with the lock her up slogan, has currently been locked up. And still they cheer. And still they holler and scream. So this is all, again, I say this quite often, this is all fact. I don't think we've had any opinion yet. There's some speculation on what motivates people to want to be lied to. But when it's the liar that makes you look like a mug, when it's Donald Trump's lifting of this policy yesterday that proves it was in his gift all along to lift it, why don't people wake up? That is something that completely baffles me. Still, I suspect it always will, but it is how terrible, terrible things happen. It is how communities and countries and populations turn on each other. Because if you can watch what happens to those children and feel anything other than revulsion and disgust, then it will happen to more children. And it will be your fault. It will be your doing. And because somehow the narrative of immigration and the narrative of asylum and the narrative of foreignness has been so successfully toxified on both sides of the Atlantic and in parts of continental Europe in the last couple of years. Somehow people can sit there and watch it and not just be cool with it, but actively enjoy it. There's a brilliant piece in a magazine called The Atlantic which suggests that one of Trump's key advisors and a former advisor to Jeff Sessions, a chap called Stephen Miller, is the real architect of this, and that he actively enjoys the processes that it creates, because what happens is Trump's supporters say, well, at least he tried, and Trump's enemies say, well, he's had to pull back. So you could construe it or conceive it as a win-win situation. On this occasion, I don't think it was deliberate. This is now speculation and opinion. I don't think it was deliberate on this occasion. I don't think he quite saw it coming in quite this way. But again, who knows? So the question for us to wrestle with this morning, very simply, is simple to ask, I suspect rather hard to answer. It is utterly, utterly impossible to account for the last few days in any way whatsoever that doesn't put full responsibility for the separation of children from their mothers and fathers and their incarceration in pretty grim conditions squarely and completely at the foot of Donald Trump. Donald Trump proved that yesterday. So do we now have to conclude that every single person who has been furiously punting the lie that Obama did the same, or that it was all the Democrats' fault, or that there was nothing Trump could do about it, a lie begun by Trump himself, do we now have to conclude that every single one of those people actually is comfortable with children being put in concentration camps? I really hope not. I'm hoping you've got a more sophisticated psychological explanation. How did this happen? That's the question for you. And the number you need to answer it, very simply, is 0345 6060 973. Now that Trump has been forced by events to acknowledge the dishonesty of his own position, why don't the people who believed him then fall out of love with him now? I'll take any answer you've got to that question, and I frankly can't wait to hear them. So, having spent a few days wondering whether it's true that there can be no smoke without fire, and wondering whether all of these people, not just on social media, but on proper media as well, even here on this wonderful radio station, people claiming that black is white, people claiming that the incarceration and separation of children in America was somehow not Donald Trump's fault, or was somehow the same as what went on before. We now categorically know that that's not true. Why don't any of these lies land on him? Well, why do you think that is? And I'll take any answer you've got. John's in Bristol. John, you can kick us off. What have you got?
Oh, hello, James. Yeah, this is a really fascinating psychological, very profound psychological illness, I think, going on with some of these people. It's like the flat earthers. You can present some people with demonstrable facts and evidence and science, and they still will just believe what they want to believe. They will just ignore what you present. I think that there was a woman on another radio station yesterday talking about the situation with the children, and she ended up bursting into tears.
Yes.
She said, "Leave our Donald alone. We love him, and he's fantastic. He's a great man, and he loves children." And she started crying.
Right.
And I really felt for her, and I think there's something really profound going on here, and I think we live in very disturbing and interesting times.
Well, I don't think I'm not going to argue with any of that, although, of course, the empathy you felt towards that woman is what makes you completely different from her, because she feels no empathy whatsoever towards the children. I didn't hear the exchange you're referring to, but it seems odd to portray Donald Trump as somehow the victim of this piece. But Flat Earth is... I don't know... I said Flat Earth maybe is a good example, although I generally find them quite comical. What is the... what's the bonus? What's the payoff? Is it just to be protected from a non-existent dragon? It's this notion of immigrants coming to kill us all, and it's not true, but once it's taken root, the man who says he'll stop it from happening is the man to whom we'll kneel.
Yes, yeah, I think for a lot of people, maybe the system up to this point has let them down, or they're disappointed in the status quo.
Now we're back to why people voted for him. No, I get that, but hang on. Today the question isn't about why did people vote for him, and I know I've fallen into that trap myself. The question now is that anybody who's been punting the notion that Obama did the same, or that the Democrats were responsible for it, or that Donald Trump couldn't stop it, they've been made to look really, really stupid by Donald Trump. Why don't they feel stupid?
Maybe it's a bit like the Brexit thing. It's maybe they can't roll back on. No one wants to admit that they've been wrong or appear foolish, and so they double down on it. And maybe they...
But you can't double down on it when he stood up in public and said, I have the power to do this. And they've spent a week saying, no, he doesn't have the power to do this. How does that work?
I don't know, James. I mean,
well, why did you ring me then?
I know that, and you know that, but all I'm saying is that I think there are some mental health issues going on with some of these people.
Well, I don't like that either, I'm afraid, because it's not a catch-all explanation, and people with mental health problems. No, I don't like that. I prefer the psychological condition. Let's use that phrase instead, and then your analogy with flat earthers works a little better. I don't know what flat earthers get out of their beliefs. I know they're a sort of dwindling bunch. There are still a few people out there who apparently subscribe to the notion that the Earth's not round. Don't ring me. I mean, crikey, I've got enough to deal with today. I don't want you to think that's a call to arms if you genuinely believe it. So what is it? I mean, today's a really good day because he proved his critics right yesterday. He did. Not anybody else, not the fake news media or China or I don't know who the enemy of the week is. He did it. Hillary Clinton, he proved his supporters wrong yesterday. He made them look stupid. And I don't believe a single needle will have moved if the needle belongs to someone who's spent the last few days furiously trying to convince others that Donald Trump hadn't actually done anything different from what had gone before. It's quite. I mean, I'm with John on that. I find it absolutely fascinating, and I can be completely fascinated and really enthusiastic and engaged, and then I actually remember it's happening, and it's happening right now. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I wish we were studying this from a perspective of 20 years hence. Cole's in Manchester. Cole, what would you like to say?
Well, I think, the last couple of years will go down in the history books as something we will study.
Yes, hopefully, if we survive.
Hopefully, yeah. So I think what you said was spot on, but the point is people have bought in, they've drunk the Kool-Aid. What Donald Trump has done is set himself up as the Messiah, as the only one that can fix it. And when the right-wing, government that he's put in puts in these enacts these policies such as cutting down on immigration, legal and illegal, he's happy to throw, Jeff Sessions under the bus and say, no, look, I saved it. Me, Big Donnie, did the good.
Yeah. And because he knows they'll swallow it. I mean, they keep coming back to that one line during the campaign that I think everything else stems from, when he said, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and they'd still love me. They'd still think I wasn't. Right. I don't think he's...
They'd have said, oh, well, you don't know what this person that he shot did, because he can do no wrong. He's built up this cult.
And how do you think... I wonder if anyone would ring us and tell us how they got out of it, how they got out of that mindset. Brexit's a much, much milder example, because the facts haven't landed completely yet on Brexit. You can still kid yourself that there's a unicorn around the corner. But what this week has proved is that he will say the polar opposite on Wednesday to what he said on Sunday, Monday and Tuesday. And I'd love to know if anyone has had the spell broken. How do you break the spell, Cole?
Well, I think there's a few people that have had the spell broken, but I think you just have to provide them with facts and try and...
But I have this morning. I've even given the dates, January the 20th, 2017 is when the executive order was issued. April the 6th, 2018 is when Jeff Sessions brought in the policy. And I have to check the count. June the 20th, 2018 is when Donald Trump issued an executive order designed to lift the policy. We might look at some of the wrinkles in that in that hope a little later in the hour. But so there are the facts, and I don't think anyone listening to this programme who has fallen under Donald Trump's spell has now suddenly fallen out of it again. If you have, then please call me and tell me.
Brainwashing.
Yes.
Yeah.
How many more shows do you think I can get out of sitting here talking to decent people about our shared sense of complete befuddlement at the nastiness and idiocy of some of our fellow human beings?
Maybe another week.
That's very optimistic. That God Mystery House coming up at 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Asking simple questions, but far from simple answers. Donald Trump yesterday proved his critics right and his supporters wrong. He made mugs of every single person on mainstream media, on social media, in the pub, on Facebook, who's been trying to argue that Barack Obama did the same thing and that the Democrats were responsible for the forced separation and incarceration of children in latter-day concentration camps. He did it. And I don't think anybody who has fallen under his spell will have fallen out of that spell as a result of him making them look stupid. And I just don't understand why. Maybe it's ego. Maybe, oddly, some of us absolutely resist furiously the notion that we could actually fall for lies. And as the evidence mounts that we have done, we become even more furious in our resistance. This is what the phrase doubling down means, I think, isn't it? So it is just, there's no earthly way. I'd rather it was ego and stubbornness than, well, the sort of impulses that allowed the Holocaust to happen. Just sort of thinking, what would have... If I'd been allowed to broadcast in 1930s Germany, looking at some of the text coming in, we go, oh, why don't you change the record, James? Why stop asking where all the Jews have gone from your neighbourhood. Stop asking about whether it's true, the rumours that are coming back to Germany from the so-called concentration camps. Anyway, it would have been just as bad under the Kaiser. Stop it, Jack. I just wonder. So that hopefully explains why I won't be changing the subject. It's 10:30. Jack McInally writes on Twitter, I really have tried to avoid Nazi comparisons. Believe it or not, I do as well. But occasionally you're left with little choice. He goes on, but it was called a final solution for a reason. They tried caging people and mass deportations prior to the Holocaust. Slinky Zebra writes, historically, when a whole community signs up to a hateful philosophy over time and then an individual starts to see the devil for what they are, it becomes socially dangerous for them to roll back from that position for fear of persecution and ostracization. That's quite generous, because that's presuming that a lot of the Obama did it too. Trump himself stated it's the Democrats' law, they have to lift it. And then yesterday he lifted it, making mugs of all his base, his core support. So you're positing, Ms. Zebra or Mr. Zebra, the possibility that base is full of people who actually do recognise him for what he is, but are too cowed to say so. I think that's too optimistic. And Niall takes up that phrase I referenced a moment ago. I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose voters. Substitute shoot for steal children and lie to my base support. The message hasn't changed, James. Neither has the average Trump supporter's mindset. And I guess I'm trying to get into that mindset. 0345 6060 still, because I don't know what else people like me are supposed to do. You can't join the other team and start believing that the other team are subhuman. You have to believe in the basic humanity, the fundamental decency of everybody. Even a white supremacist, you have to believe, is persuadable from that position. Otherwise, humanity itself is debased, and the people debasing humanity have won. So what else do? You just try to work it out. I would love to talk to you if you look back upon your own recent political activity and can't quite believe that you fell for it. 0345 6060 is the number that you need, because it was him that said it's a Democrats' law, the Democrats have to lift it. I hate the footage coming in from Texas. And it was him that lifted the law, making a liar of everybody, making a liar of himself and everybody that repeated his lies. If someone made a liar out of me, I would hate them. And yet Trump makes a liar out of his core support, and they seem to love him more. I just want to get inside that, work it out, understand it. Jonty is in St John's Wood. Jonty, what would you like to say?
James, I think the reason why you're struggling with this one is that
it's an understatement of the century, my friend.
Yeah. Well, it's testament to your good character that you are, because you're over-rationalizing what is an extremely emotional connection between Trump supporter and Trump. I think it's the equivalent of... Have you ever known anyone in an abusive relationship with a spouse, with a partner?
I have, yes.
Yeah? And for some time, I mean, the spell can break, but for years, you can throw 100 facts at the woman or the man being abused. But they will not leave the abuser because they're under some kind of spell.
But he's not abusing them.
He is.
But only in the context of lying and fibbing. He's not ripping their children away from them and locking them up.
Oh, you're being too literal.
Go on.
The whole relationship between Trump and those supporters that can't look at him critically is an abusive relationship.
Okay.
But it's based on the same abuse mechanism that you find within people who may live with each other. The same abuse. It's distorted, it's delusional, but it's a love thing. As you said, I could shoot someone and they'll still love me.
How do you break the spell then? Do we know? I mean, is there a psychological response, if you like, to the condition you describe? A solution, an antidote?
And that's why people are comparing him. I don't think he's like Hitler, but that's why they're comparing him to Hitler, because Hitler had the same emotional spell over a lot of very smart people in Germany.
Yes.
Loved Hitler, even though they were very smart, because they had something in their psychology where they needed a savior. They needed someone.
But before they need a savior, they need an enemy.
Well, the enemy is normally within. The enemy is normally anger within. The anger within.
No, do they need a human enemy? So Hitler had, the Jews, the intellectuals, the communists, mostly, of course, the Jews, the Roma, just like in Italy we're seeing history repeat itself. And Trump doesn't really have that. So there is obviously a porous border at the bottom of Texas, but the idea that it impacts upon Americans in the middle of the country in some negative economic way is complete nonsense. But he has to persuade them that it does. It's why we hear the language of infestation, isn't it? It's why we hear the language of insects and hordes. We hear it in this country as well. If I can persuade you that you're under threat from people you're never going to meet, you will empower me to do terrible things to them.
Yeah, that's why the fear of immigration is greatest in areas where there's no immigration. It's not none of it's factually real. It's all emotional. And if we try, the problem is that if you're on the liberal side of politics, you're generally thinking a lot with your head.
Yes.
People thinking with their head, they're emoting with their heart, and that takes them to a very different place. So you can rationalize and argue till the end of your life, and then another 100 lifetimes. It won't make a jot of difference to the people under this emotional spell of abuse. It won't make any difference at all.
Because you're trying to explain the concept of hunger by working out the chemical formulation of food.
Yeah, exactly.
Jonty, take care. Not a very optimistic analysis, but as I said, you can't stop trying, because you just hope that the more you try and the more you point out this stuff and the more facts you share with people, either on the radio or in real sort of life or in social media, the more pennies will eventually drop. And I guess you could possibly console yourself with the thought that people might not own up to having seen the error of their ways, but they will privately and quietly rejoin the ranks of the decent and the humanitarian and the people who don't feel comfortable or seek to justify ripping children away from their mothers and locking them up in cages. Roderick's in Brittany, in France. Roderick, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. First-time caller.
Very welcome. Bienvenue.
Yeah, I lived in the States for a long time, and I was speaking to an dear old friend of mine in Minnesota last night, who's in despair at it all. But he pointed out and something that Trump himself admitted in his own in his book.
Ghost written by a man who is now his harshest critic, just for the record.
Right, but and he said the bigger the lie and the more you keep telling it, eventually they'll give in, and it doesn't matter.
Well, that was Joseph Goebbels, mate. Did Donald Trump really say that? Well, because Goebbels said word for word.
He said in his book, lie, 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 and keep it up, don't give in, and then you've got them.
I've got the Goebbels quote in front of me, oddly enough. Make the lie big, keep it simple, keep saying it, and eventually they will believe it.
Pretty much the same thing as Trump said.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Roderick. Sorry to interrupt, because the other thing I've got, it's one of those internet mashups, because the other thing that's attached to that is this, which Donald Trump was saying earlier in the week. I hate the children being taken away. The Democrats have to change their law. That's their law. So that was the lie, and it was simple, and he did keep saying it, and he did make it big. But yesterday he proved it was a lie. So theoretically, something should have snapped.
Of course. Yes, theoretically, but then he goes off to Minnesota and gives it to another of his mass rallies. It's not he blows over it and goes back to the fake news. And when you keep and that's what he's done from the very start. Everything, all the news, everything you hear about me from any of the news apart from Fox, because they say nice things about him, is fake. And
even when it's footage of him, I mean, this is Orwell, actually. I mean, even when it's footage of him contradicting himself, the notion of objective truth has now been so fundamentally subverted that they can continue to believe two completely contradictory things at the same time.
They won't call him on it because he won't bring it up again. And even if they do, he'll change the subject. Oh, no, well, we're taking care of it. We're going to take care of this. We're going to take care of this problem. But we've still got a massive problem. And he'll encourage, it's a sort of encouragement for them to, just change the subject, anything to change.
And what they get in return is that sense of, it's why Jonty points out that this fear of immigration coupled with xenophobia is much more acute in areas where there aren't any immigrants or where there isn't any immigration. So they think he's the only one that can protect them from this horrible, horrible enemy that they are never going to see.
Yes.
And because they're a horrible, horrible enemy, that's how they can be comfortable with seeing their children torn away from them and locked up in concentration camps.
Absolutely.
So what breaks the spell? What breaks the spell?
I don't know what breaks the spell.
Well, we need to find out fast, Roderick.
Yeah,
otherwise it'll be here next.
I couldn't agree more, James, and so we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, keep fighting, up and at them. Calling it out, just hitting fact until they cart you away. There you go. That's what it'll say on my gravestone. It's coming up to 11:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're just trying to get inside the mindset of people who sadly no longer have the wherewithal or the cojones ever to call me. I hear them on other people's programmes. Sheila Fogarty has the patience of a saint, I have to say. It's a privilege and a pleasure listening to her when I'm in the office catching up with other stuff. But some of the people that ring her, it's unbelievable. Unbelievable, the level of delusion. But they don't ring me anymore. I can't think why. And the tickets are available now, actually. I've been meaning to mention it to you. I keep forgetting. It does rather annoy my producers. A week today, I will be hosting the State of London debate at the Indigo O2 with Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. It's your chance to ask the Mayor about the issues that matter to you. Nothing is off the table, and there are only a few days left to get your free tickets. So head over to lbc.co.uk and follow the instructions on how to get hold of those. And I hopefully will see you next Thursday, the 28th of June at the O2, where if you're very, very good, I might let you buy me a drink after the show. Back to Donald Trump. Just by way of a reminder of how mad things are, I thought I'd remind you about the inscription on the Statue of Liberty that used to embody American values. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Kind of needs rewriting for the Trump administration, doesn't it? Which would be, if you are heading in this direction while fleeing poverty and violence, we'll nick your children. It's not quite as pithy, is it? Or as inspirational. 10 minutes to 11 is the time. Just trying to unravel the simple elements of what's happened this week. Donald Trump saying, I hate what's happening in Texas. It's the Democrats' law. The Democrats have to lift it. And then lifting it himself yesterday, proving that he was lying all along. And by the way, this is not a moment for celebration. The more you read into this executive order, the more room there is for doubt and worry, because, of course, the truth has left the building. So, I mean, the idea that families can be detained together currently has a legal limit of 20 days. So first thing that's under threat is that. You could now be locking families up indefinitely without trial. There'll be legal challenges, but, you know, once you've got this rump of support behind you, the rump that has been lied to and loved it this week, ultimate and conclusive proof. He's lying to them and they still love it. That's where the rest of us get really, really left behind. Just can't quite get it. And that's how suddenly you understand all of those things in our history books that we just felt almost must have been undertaken by a different species, even when they've happened in our own lifetimes, in places like Rwanda or the Democratic Republic of Congo, and you think that can't be. They're not. No. Yugoslavia, even better example. You saw Yugoslavia, you know, Europeans, Sarajevo, a city that cosmopolitan and inspirational, and it happened there. And you know, but you know, they're still not. You know, the Balkans. There's always trouble. They're not like ours. They're not like you and me. They're not like my schoolmates and my colleagues. They would never be comfortable with this kind of stuff. Now you realise that they would. And I just don't know how you break the spell. I don't know what they get in return. How frightened would you have to be of people that you're never going to meet to somehow laud a man who promises to keep them away from you? It's that level of fear. It's unbelievable. And you can't blame it all on hate news websites and dodgy social media outlets, because this stuff has been happening for centuries. It's as old as the hills. It's just the technology that's changed. Tony's in East Finchley. Tony, what do you think?
I think the problem is that you're thinking of us as rational beings, and fundamentally we're not. We make instinctive judgments based on a pre-existing prejudice, and then we seek the facts to support this.
I agree with that, and that's why I find what's happened in the last 24 hours so fascinating, because the mental gymnastics you would have to undertake to simultaneously believe that it was a law that the Democrats and only the Democrats could remove, and watch the man who said that remove it. That's a new level, isn't it, of dissonance?
I think you're right in saying that the cognitive dissonance, but what you're underestimating is the brain's ability to do everything to avoid this dissonance. The dissonance comes from where you have a prejudice, say, immigrants are a threat, because let's remember that we spend most of human existence where anything that looked different to us was a threat. And establishing that as a threat as quickly as possible was essential to our survival. It was the most important primal instincts for survival. So just simply saying, well, we don't need that anymore because we're not hunter-gatherers, is kind of missing the point. We are hardwired to do that.
Well, then why are so many people not hardwired to do that?
Well, I think we accept after a while, the rational brain accepts that.
So how do you accelerate? What can be a catalyst? I use the figure of speech breaking the spell, but how do you catalyse that acceptance?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is we have to recognise this and understand this prejudice exists in all of us. I think the problem is partly that people on all left and right so kind of think, oh, well, this doesn't apply to me. Yes, it does. It applies to absolutely everybody. The second thing, and I think what was really interesting, is that as with the Syrian refugee crisis, you had fact after fact about thousands of people and this, that and the other did nothing. You see an image of a child on a beach, a dead child, and it hits you at an emotional level, and that's the fundamental level we need. And in exactly the same way, all these facts about children suffering didn't make a difference. It was the audio, hearing the children crying, that reaches into a primal instinct, and it hits us an instinctive level.
But there are people still. I mean, Italy and Malta have just turned away a boat. Thousands have already drowned in the Mediterranean this year, and I played the audio 3 or 4 times on Monday's show, and still got a call from a woman in Bishop Stortford who was cool with it.
Yeah,
Bishop Stortford, Tony. Bishop Stortford, man.
Well, you get Ann Coulter saying these children are actors, but the point is that the people will seek any facts that justify this, that justify their prejudice. So they go, oh, yeah, well, Obama did the same, or Clinton did this, that, and the other. They're desperate for the facts because they have this deep, deep, deep instinctive prejudice. And what's happening is that I think 3 things, or a couple of things. One is the Internet means that you can find the facts to justify your prejudice. And bearing in mind...
Without doing what fascists have previously done, even though Trump obviously dreams of doing this, you can do it with the Internet, lets you do it without actually shutting down the newspapers and the television stations. I appreciate that in Hungary they've silenced all dissent and opposition in mainstream media, but in America you can still watch CNN, you can still watch CBS. You don't need to shut them down anymore because you can just push everyone towards InfoWars and Breitbart.
Yeah, because again, if you look at the brain psychology, and there's umpteen tests that psychologists have done. Once we find the fact that confirms a prejudice, we stop looking.
Yeah.
There's actually experiments to say that the brain experiences distress when you have this cognitive dissonance, and when this is eased, it literally releases serotonin. So your whole brain chemistry is set up to say, right, I've found the fact that confirms this, that, in this case, Obama did the same, or it was Congress, or the children...
The Democrats did it.
And you stop looking there. So the first thing is, I think, to educate children, educate people to do this, and not... And this means everybody, it means people on left and right. Don't think, well, I can see what's wrong, so I don't need to do this. You need to check your prejudice all the time.
Mm.
The second thing I think to do is to counteract the people who are aware of this, because we walk around saying, well, we understand this, but it's kind of like advertisers,
Yes, it's incremental, it seeps, and how you stop that from happening is probably going to have to be a very slow and incremental process as well. Tony, I'm cracking on only so I can squeeze in at least one more caller. Patrick is in Elton. Patrick, what would you like to say?
Oh, it's my cue. Hello, James.
Hello,
Hi.
Patrick. How are you?
Yes, very well, thank you. I was sort of one of those people who were sort of swept up by the Pied Piper, if you like, or under the spell, as you put it. And I have to say, in no certain terms, you were my liberator. It's quite true. And I think if I could just sort of share my experience briefly,
yes, of course.
Because I can't sort of talk on a general point, although I understand.
No, I don't want you to. I just want you to talk about you. And
Yeah.
you're very kind, but you don't need to talk any more about me.
Yeah, no, you're quite right.
Okay.
So when I was 16, my first encounter with politics was the 2014 European Union debate with Nick Clegg and Nigel Farage.
Yes.
And Farage was almost like my Charles Manson, if you like. Can I say that? Or is that too
Absolutely,
far?
of course you can. I think that's quite kind.
Yes. And I joined UKIP. I was in secondary school, and
can I ask what you were frightened of? Why? Why did you need a cult leader?
Yeah. I think what it was it's incredibly difficult to explain. But if I could just proceed, and if I can come back to that point, because I'm almost working it out myself.
Yes, of course.
Therapy, to be honest. So my interest in politics, that got me interested in politics, and subsequently a few years down the line, it wasn't about facts, it wasn't about arguments. What it was about is, like you say, actually picking a side and sort of doing everything you can to perpetuate your side's view. And your previous caller was absolutely correct, although about having an emotional reaction and finding the facts to do it. But it's not about finding the facts. It's not about finding the facts. It's about taking arguments or things you hear, because those figureheads, the Nigel Farages, the Jacob Rees-Moggs, the Kate Hopkins, the Donald Trumps, they are the compasses, if you like, for the people who support them. For most people, for me anyway, that's what it was like.
I
understand. What you take from that.
Yeah.
I still don't understand why you wanted to. Did you? I hope I'm not sounding unkind, but I mean,
no.
Were you in a really bad place? Were you? I mean,
no. It was politics used to really bore me, and there was something about Farage and his charisma that it just got me engaged, and I was sort of swept up in that.
Okay.
It was like a movement. It was almost quite exciting in a way from my sort of ignorant point of view that I knew nothing about politics, and this was quite new, you know. And it gave me perhaps a simplistic view of the world that I didn't really know before, you know. And this is
that's quite comforting to think that incredibly complicated issues like are actually quite simple, and they can be solved by building a wall or making America great again. Or controlling our borders, or whatever the phrase of the week might be.
Yeah, exactly, and it's really about the slogan. So, anyway, when I went to college, I got involved in sort of student union stuff.
I'm gonna go to the news and come back actually, because I don't want to hurry you, and I'm really interested in learning how the spell breaks or the penny drops, Patrick. So don't go anywhere. All right, it's 11 o'clock. I'm keen to dig a little deeper into that scandal that it was reported that emerged yesterday regarding the Gosport War Memorial Hospital. I don't apologise for this anymore, because it makes for really fertile time together for us when we sort of work out what question we should be asking between us, sometimes after we've even started the topic. There's something about whistleblowing and white coat syndrome, the idea that doctors... Actually, I'd like trusting doctors. It's a bit like the conversation we're having with Patrick. They make the world feel like a simpler place. You are poorly, you go to the doctor will cure you. But of course, what if two doctors disagree with each other? Then who are you going to believe? And if you put too much trust in a doctor, you could end up... Well... You know the details of that story. Who's Patrick, I hear you ask? Well, he was on the line to us just before the news, explaining how he, at the age of 16, fell into the kind of nativist, racist mindset. I don't want to put words in his mouth, that we're trying to unravel. How can Donald Trump lie to his supporters, prove that he's lied himself, make mugs of them all, and not suffer any loss in support or popularity? But the real question we're trying to work out is, how do you break the spell of people who this week have been parroting his line that the law that allows the government to rip children away from their parents and put them in concentration camps, he's been insisting that is down to the Democrats and only the Democrats can lift it. They've been repeating it furiously, and then yesterday he lifted it, made a mockery of both the truth and of them, and they don't mind. So what breaks the spell? Patrick, carry on. You were just off, I think you were just leaving school when we were interrupted.
That was right, but I have to say I've never been in a racist mindset. I mean, I have to dispute that, if that's okay.
No, okay, no, fine. Then it becomes even more confusing what drew you to this particular political movement. But carry on. I'm interested in what broke the spell.
No worries. So I left school and I went to college, got involved in sort of local politics, and I got an internship with the local MP. And what that did was really broaden my mind in terms of speaking to different people, in terms of exploring different issues that we're not really at the forefront of our minds, you know, in the news or what you see on social media. And from that, because I was never sort of going to go to university, I didn't particularly think I was cut out for it, but I was persuaded by the MP that I worked for and the former principal of the college to go.
Oh, lovely.
And it was, it was really, really nice actually. And so...
So education is the short answer to the question that I'm asking.
Yes, I think it is, because when I was learning about all these different things, I've just done my first year at politics at Goldsmiths, and, you know, learning about liberal internationalism and things like that, and I think, that's the way forward. And I thought, oh, crikey, I voted to leave perhaps the biggest body in the world that sort of drives liberal internationalism. Surely, no, it's got to be different. Surely,
that's why. Sorry, I'm sorry I reached for the racist line. So you were persuaded by the emotional misrepresentation of the European Union rather than which went hand in hand for a lot of Brexit supporters, but by no means for all of them. The notion that somehow foreigners were going to ruin your life, that it was the EU that was going to ruin your life.
Yes, absolutely. And I was very much on that sort of that battlefield. And then I slowly, because it's not a sudden thing, and you're saying how can people...
No, I'm sure it isn't.
It's a gradual breakdown of, if pardon the pun, the wall.
Yes.
You know, and that for me, and then I started sort of listening to people I don't agree with, because I always just think, oh, you know, that James O'Brien bloke, you know.
Yes, you don't want to trust him.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And what it is quite clever. There's a sort of a metaphorical social filter that's placed before your brain by, you know, the
the populism, whatever. And automatically, if you hear James O'Brien on the radio, or you hear this person talking here, that filter automatically shuts down.
And you do that with labels. We're back to the slogan. So if you put metropolitan liberal elite, they act like earplugs.
You perk up. Yeah, exactly.
Got you.
And the social filter sort of opens up. So it's very clever because it's almost like you're placing a defence mechanism in people that that reason and logic simply can't get through. But in my case, it was bashing against it because I started listening to you and different other things, and I couldn't resist it anymore. And eventually, and it was over a gradual period of a few months, over the year actually, from and then finally, I just thought, gosh, what on earth?
What on earth? And then that is it. Unfortunately, not everyone can sign up to do a politics degree or indeed find the time to tune into us every day.
Yeah, I know.
Although what is weird is that
very kind people that upload your videos to YouTube.
That has helped. Yes. Well, God bless them all. But then I still get the people listening every day who just to read one tweet here, you are a traitor to your country, you will get your comeuppance, and they're listening every day as well. So are you suggesting, and I kind of hope you are, but I suspect you're not, that if I keep on keeping on, then eventually even he will come to his senses?
Yes, keep on, because you're not bashing your head against a brick wall. Every time you are breaking the bits of those cinder blocks, and eventually it will come down, James.
It's my head I'm worried about, Patrick. It's my head I'm worried about.
Well, it's not just you. There's others as well.
Absolutely, of course.
So keep on, and thank you.
Have you done your finals yet? Have you graduated?
No, I only finished my first year.
That's what I thought you said. I think you're on course for a first, my friend.
Oh, I don't know about that. I'm dyslexic.
You'll be fine. You'll be absolutely fine. And do keep in touch. I'd love to talk to you again. What a lovely call. I'm going to allow myself to just bask in that, I'm afraid, undiluted and unpolluted by cynicism and negativity. What a lovely young man. You see, there's hope for everybody. Even the people suggesting that I should be hung from the nearest lamppost. One day you too could be like Patrick. And didn't he sound so happy and at one with the world, even with all the horrible stuff going on, because humanity does that to you. A couple more calls on this, I think, and then we'll crack on. I think we'll crack on with the Gosport War Memorial Hospital story. And then don't forget at 12 o'clock, it's Mystery Hour, so we've got some giggles guaranteed before lunchtime. Melissa is in Edinburgh. Melissa, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm just listening to your show. I couldn't help but think of the quote by Jonathan Swift about how you can't reason a person out of a position that they didn't reason themselves into.
Yes, that does rather sum things up, doesn't it? Although Patrick offers a glimmer of hope that things aren't necessarily that bleak.
Yeah, I think there is hope. I think there's been quite a few studies, like psychological studies, that have shown that you can't win people over with facts and knowledge, and quite often, and actually what that does is make people knuckle down on their sort of beliefs even more. And the way that we can get around that is by appealing to people's empathy and their personal experiences. I actually watched a really fascinating video of LGBT equality rights people that knocked on doors and were just talking to people, sort of getting their opinions and trying to make them come around to the sort of more liberal way of thinking about equality.
Yes.
And what
it works.
they did was, it did, yeah. So they started off, they didn't really talk about the actual issue. They talked about, can you think of a time when you felt like a bit of an outsider? Can you feel of a time when you didn't feel like you fitted into society, and sort of worked around that conversation first? And
imagine what it feels like that all the time, and you're doing that to other people. Well, that was why I mentioned on Monday that if you have children when they're tiny and they lose you for 2 minutes, and you as a parent have an appalling panic, but the child is devastated. I mean, the children can be absolutely crushed and terrified when they don't know where mummy is, get lost in a supermarket. You see them, we all see them crying, and I thought that might be a pivot or a way of helping people who somehow had been persuaded to cheer the 21st century concentration camps full of children that Donald Trump is responsible, or still is responsible for. And maybe it does. The thing is that you never know, do you, how when you throw a stone into the water, you never know where the ripples go.
Yeah, I think you did the right thing, actually, when you sort of, before you played the clip, you said, how can you think of a time when you've lost your child, or when you were a child and you got lost and were sort of taken away from your parents for a few minutes. Can you think how that made you feel? And then play the clip. If news, like media outlets, had done that in a way first, before they went into a barrage of, oh, look what Trump is doing, how terrible he is, and sort of made it into more of a war and sort of stoking the fire even more of division, just sort of saying, can you think of a time when you felt like this, and now listen to this.
And that's where the really toxic rhetoric becomes important, and that's why he's now started talking about animals and insects and infestations, because you can only kill empathy by making people see these humans as being somehow not human. The Nazis, I think, called it the Untermensch, didn't they? That's what you do. And the phrases they use, the spivs and the sort of barroom racists will talk about the right kind of people. It's underpinning, actually, that notion that our immigration policy should look at people's quality, as if you have a hierarchy of humanity. If you can persuade enough people that somehow one human is inferior to another, then you can kill empathy, even if they have the capability of feeling it. Just to cheer you up, Melissa.
No, I think just watching that little clip actually gave me some sort of more optimism that people, even within a space of 10 minutes, can actually be reasoned out. Well, not reasoned, no, but sort of you can appeal to the shared humanity.
Yes. Otherwise, you also have to point out what the alternative is. I think you have to point out to people that they are cheering policies which, if they'd read about them in a history book, they would have been disgusted by. But something has happened in the crucible of public life and rhetoric, and charismatic, for want of a better word, politicians like Donald Trump have persuaded people into really, really ugly places, and a lot of the time they won't have noticed. Oh, well, you shouldn't break the law then. Well, okay, what are you going to do next? Start beheading shoplifters? You're going to use the fact that, and also it's a misdemeanor, not a crime. Historically, that was the point that everything changed on April the 6th when Jeff Sessions introduced the policy. The idea that, well, if you've broken the law, then you deserve everything that the state throws at you, including having your children ripped away from you and locked up in cages. And so, it has to be. Sorry, I'm not ready yet. Thank you, Melissa. I'm not ready to give up on humans yet. However, many people queue up to insist that humanity is not to be valued. However many people queue up to insist that ripping children away from their parents and locking them up in cages is somehow a desirable or a workable policy. It's not. It's just not. It's disgusting. It will always be disgusting. It always has been disgusting, and anybody supporting it is quite clearly disgusting.